Hello, grade 12s. Welcome back. It's Economics with Ms. Piwe, and today we are focusing on environmental sustainability. Right, we're going to move on to our next discussion, which is around the issue of conservation. So we know that conservation relates to the preservation or the looking after of natural resources to ensure that they are completely used up, that they are not completely used up and disappear from the environment. So we want to look after the natural resources, although we do need the natural resources in the production process, but we need to ensure that the future generations also have access to these natural resources. So we need to prolong them in our usage so that they do not die out or disappear from the environment. So conservation is very important. You do have structures or organizations that focus on this to ensure that we protect our natural resources. And I know that the South African, I think it's called the South African Parks Board, actually ensures that our natural resources are looked after and that the future generations could have access to them. So conservation is necessary due to the pollution and also to the overutilization or using too much of resources. So because when we pollute, we actually are compromising our natural resources, but also when we overutilize our natural resources, we also compromise their sustainability as well. So the conservation of stocks or resources. So conservation is needed when stocks are utilized or used more than they can be reproduced to replace what has been used. So for example, that's when we look at the fishing industry. So the fishing needs to be regulated in a way that it's okay to fish for certain species, but you also have to give it time for the reproduction to actually happen. So the stock must actually pick up before you go back and utilize those stocks. So almost like in a supermarket, you use up and then there's an opportunity to actually put stuff back into the shelves so that you'll be able to access the goods and services that you require. So same with the conservation of stock. We need to ensure that the utilization is not more than what can be reproduced or can be replaced in terms of what has been used. So this leads, okay, so let me pull my screen down. There we are. So this leads to a search for substitutes because what was initially used or used in the process has been used up and we can't actually access those raw materials or those goods and services. So we'll have to look for substitute products in order to replace the stock that can no longer be reproduced. So conservation policies help to conserve the renewable stocks, for example, trees, and the non-renewable stocks, for example, the fossil fuels. Okay, so it's important to know that there are policies in place that can be used in order to ensure that there is protection of the renewable and non-renewable stocks. The renewable ones, they can be reproduced, hence we call them the renewable items, and the non-renewable, once they have been consumed, they can't be reproduced. So know the difference between renewable and non-renewable stocks as well. So what can be done to maintain the renewable stocks? So a market economy has an interest in the conservation as it helps to maintain the renewable stocks. For example, the timber and fishing, that's trees, and if we are fishing for species in our oceans. So conservation is achieved through the force of demand and supply, which helps to sustain these kinds of industries. So they will be sourced based on the demand. So the market forces of supply and demand actually help in the process of sustaining these kinds of industries. So it's not just because we feel like going and getting more fish. So they will fish more when they know that there's a high demand at that particular time in the industry. And when there isn't demand, then there's not going to be any fishing taking place, because it's driven by the forces of supply and demand. So market forces play an important role in order to regulate those industries. We also have what we call the direct controls that can be used in order to ensure that we do conserve these natural resources. So government maintains the stock levels of environmental resources through the issuing of permits and also the quotas to the different suppliers. So if we are dealing with limited resources, so government has to issue out permits to particular suppliers who will have access to the sourcing and using of those resources. And a quota system will have to be developed on the quantity that can actually be consumed or sourced in order to maintain the environmental sustainability. For example, government sets quotas for fishing to stop catches being so large that they exceed a bigger number or the growth of the fish population. So here there will be a ceiling that would be imposed in terms of how much fish can be fished or catched by the fishermen, and it mustn't be bigger than the growth of the fish population as well. So we call that a quota system. It's put in place in order to regulate the quantity in that market as well. So it also sets quotas for cutting down trees to ensure that we don't deal where deforestation does not exceed the rate of renewal as well. So it's important because here we are dealing with scarce resources. If we don't protect them, then the future generations will not have access to them. So it's important to consider those two things. Remember, with these sort of questions, you have to give examples. Hence, I've included the examples here so that you're in a position to give an example of what a quotas will be on the fishing industry and also on the timber industry, and why government actually puts those direct controls in these particular industries. Then we move on to our next point, which is preservation. So we've looked at conservation, and now we are looking at preservation. So preservation is linked to conservation. It is about preserving existing assets to ensure they do not get used in a way that it is destructive to the environment. So for this to actually happen, this process must take place. We must preserve our natural resources in order to ensure that they are not used in a destructive manner. For example, starting off with private property, so we're going to look at that as our first example. So a game reserve, may be sold to a businessman to be used for farming, but the government can intervene and stop the sale because they recognize the importance to the environment of preserving the game farm. So government may step in a situation where they see that we need to preserve the natural resource. In this particular instance, that's the game farm, because a businessman wants to use the piece of land for farming. So the government could step in and intervene in that process, because with a game farm, we are dealing with wildlife, and we need that. We need a safe environment for wildlife because of all the poaching that's currently happening in our country. Also still looking at preservation. So preservation requires compromise. So I kind of like that opening sentence, a give and take. So farmers may develop their river mouth as a holiday resort. If this is not controlled and too many other farmers do the same, the entire ecosystem will be damaged. and animal and plant life will be negatively affected. So it's okay for a small group of farmers to actually do this and develop their river mouth and make it a holiday resort. But if all the farmers do this, this is going to have a negative impact on our ecosystem. So our ecosystem will be damaged and the well-being of the animal and plant life will be negatively affected by this decision. So it's important to have some regulation of some sort in these different structures or developments. So how do we ensure that we have sustainability in our environment? So the market is driven by self-interest. So the market considers the environment as an asset to be used for its own benefit. So sustainability is achieved in the free market only to the extent that resource prices rise as they become scarce or less available. So you're dealing with the problem of scarcity, and then you have too many people chasing after a few products, then that also leads to inflation. And then also through the development of an environmental or an environment-friendly technology. So technology also plays an important role when it comes to sustaining the environment. But markets do see the environment as an asset that can be used in order to generate income. So interventions need to come from government in order to ensure that that is regulated and the resource prices are regulated in a way. So when the resource prices go up, then they become scarce, less available, and then we have to rely on technology that is environmentally friendly. So moving right along, so there is a social interest in using the environment, not only to the direct producer or consumer, but also to people in general, now and in the future. So this means we all have an interest in preserving the environment because we like to go on holiday. You like to go on a game park or on a game reserve and go for a drive and see the big five and so on. But if you don't take a stand in order to preserve the environment, then you are not going to enjoy those benefits that the environment brings to our lives. Because like we said, when we looked at tourism in our previous lesson, we spoke about leisure and just going away into a quiet place and being in touch with Mother Nature. So if we don't have Mother Nature, that is the environment, so who are we going to be in touch with when we are wanting to relax and so on? So it's important that we all play an important role, and hence in other schools they've got the Enviro Club, and you can sign up to be part of the Enviro Club, and then you start within your school premises controlling the litter situation, the usage of water, because water is another scarce resource. So you can't leave a tap running the whole day. And if you see that there's a pipe burst or something, you report that immediately. So some of the reasons why the market fails to ensure sustainability, because we know that the market plays an important role in this whole process, but sometimes they do fail to ensure sustainability. So we said that the market sees the environment as a common resource, something that they need to use in order to generate an income. So they want to sell the fish onto the supermarkets or to the people. So when they see the ocean, they see a common resource where they can go and catch fish and then sell them in the fish market. But also there are externalities that they need to consider, such as air pollution, which is caused by factories. It cannot be stopped without restrictive policies. So government has an important role in terms of ensuring that they've got policies that they can impose in order to stop this. So the factories are not going to stop polluting because they aren't specific and enforceable restrictive policies that can be used to stop them. So they take full advantage of those situations and they continue to pollute the the environment. So these are some of the challenges. Also, the lack of knowledge in terms of what can be done in order to conserve or to preserve the environment, and also issues like what really causes damages to the environment. Sometimes companies are not well informed as to what really harms the environment. So businesses cause damage without realizing. For example, companies making the aerosol cans, such as the spray-on deodorants, and did not know that the damaging effect they had on the ozone layer. So they were just making their product, the cans, but they didn't know that they were actually contributing to the ozone or to the damage that gets done to the ozone layer. So without having the knowledge or the information, then you can't know if you are really causing harm to the environment. So more education needs to be done in terms of what are the causes or what are some of the actions that are considered to be dangerous when it comes to the environment. So other companies say, you know what, we didn't know. We were just producing an item, but we didn't know that it had a negative impact on the planet or on the environment. So it's important to educate people and businesses as well. And the nature that people are so careless, people continue with harmful practices and leave future generations to worry about the consequences, okay? So people, you can see a bin, that there's a bin over there, but then you will just decide to throw that piece of paper on the floor when you can actually walk to the bin and put the paper there. I love when people do the recycling programs, because the bins will be labeled that here you put paper, there you put cans, and in here you put plastic. And people will actually put litter in these bins. So that's just absolutely appalling. So it's important that we as citizens are accountable and we take responsibility in terms of preserving the environment, because if we don't do that, then we are compromising the future of the next generation in terms of the resources. All right, so let's take a quick break. I will see you right after this.